The rain had started hours ago, a slow, persistent tapping against the window that sounded almost like fingers drumming a soft, irregular rhythm. Miriam sat at the edge of her bed, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the old wooden radio on the dresser. Its varnish had dulled over the years, and the dial was worn smooth, but tonight it seemed to pulse faintly in the dim lamplight. She hadn't planned on turning it on. Usually, she preferred silence, but the storm had made the apartment feel too empty, the walls too close, the shadows too alert. A crackle, low and resonant, erupted from the speakers when she rotated the dial. She froze. The static swelled, the room vibrating imperceptibly with it, until, beneath the hiss, a melody emerged. A lullaby, slow and fluid, like a river bending through the night. It was unfamiliar, yet the notes brushed her skin with an odd intimacy, brushing against the soft edges of her memory. She leaned closer, hand trembling, trying to place the tune. It wasn't from her childhood, not from the radio programs she remembered, not from any online playlist or album. Yet there was a pull in it, as if it knew her, as if she had hummed it in some hidden past. The first thing she noticed was how the sound shifted with the room. She moved closer to the window, pressing her cheek to the cold glass, and the lullaby seemed to swell, swelling in resonance with the chill. A moment later, when she stepped back toward the dresser, the melody softened, almost hesitant, like it had been listening and adjusting itself to her movements. Her heart began to beat faster. "I must be imagining it," she whispered to the room, but the rain had softened enough now that her words seemed swallowed by the walls. The radio's light flickered, dim and warm, pulsing almost like a heartbeat. Miriam tried to remember the last time she had felt so unsettled in her own home. Perhaps it was a trick of fatigue, the storm, the dark, the isolation. Yet the melody gnawed at something beneath that rationality, a tug that was at once comforting and wrong. It wound through her mind, threading into her dreams without asking permission. She sat on the floor, back against the bed, knees pressed together, listening. The lullaby carried a strange texture, notes that shimmered like moonlight on wet asphalt, harmonies that smelled faintly of old wood and dust, of the kind of darkness that has been breathing for centuries. The song had pauses, sudden and precise, that seemed to punctuate her own thoughts. When she exhaled, it hesitated. When she blinked, a note lingered longer than it should. Miriam's fingers grazed the radio's casing. The temperature was warmer than the room, almost alive under her touch. A shiver crawled up her spine. At some point, she realized she was humming along, quietly at first, then louder, as if the song had claimed her voice. Each note felt drawn from her own memory, yet it was not her memory. It was something else, layered beneath, coiled inside the soft folds of her awareness. She tried to stop, but the lullaby only grew more insistent, a tide of sound threading through the room with purpose. She noticed, then, that the rain outside had slowed to an eerie hush, as though the storm itself had been waiting for this music. Her apartment was small, the kitchen visible from her bedroom doorway. A clock ticked somewhere in the hall, a human rhythm that clashed against the impossible timing of the melody. Miriam's pulse quickened. Something about the song seemed to respond to her breathing now, as if it were alive, aware. She stood and walked toward the kitchen. The moment she passed the doorway, the lullaby paused. A pregnant, stretching silence, and then resumed, a single note longer than before, bending downward, almost like a sigh. Her throat constricted. She had not known a song could feel resentful or patient. The radio's volume fluctuated subtly, rising just above comprehension, dipping back again in response to her steps. She moved back toward it, and the air around her thickened, a damp heaviness that clung to skin and hair. Each note vibrated through the floorboards, through her ribs, and lodged in her chest. There was something in it now, something that belonged to her. Not just her, but the apartment, the storm, the dark corners of the world she had never dared name. It sounded like a lullaby she should have known, should have sung herself as a child, but never had. Miriam's hand hovered over the radio. She wanted to switch it off, smash it even, But the pull of the music was magnetic, her body leaning in without consent. The room felt impossibly close, walls bending in, shadows pooling like water. And then she noticed, each phrase of the melody had words, though she had never heard them articulated. The tones shaped themselves into whispered syllables, indistinct, intimate, and horrifyingly familiar. The whispering seemed to name things, places she had only dreamed of, people she could not recall, events she should not have remembered. The first real panic struck when she realized the lullaby knew her name. Not just Miriam, but the names of her parents, her childhood friends, the dog she had lost before she could say goodbye. A cold sweat coated her scalp and back as the radio's warmth pressed against her palm like a living thing. She stumbled backward, and the song followed, each note stretching longer, bending toward her, wrapping the apartment in impossible familiarity. Her own breath rattled against the walls. Her own heartbeat seemed inadequate, too slow, too fragile. Desperation led her to open the window. The rain had stopped completely, but the night was thick, black, and silent, as if the world beyond the glass had paused. She leaned out, hoping to let the cold air sever the bond. But the lullaby did not care for physical boundaries. One note, pure, clear, and impossibly loud, rippled through the room and paused as she recoiled, almost testing her. Miriam realized then that the song had been waiting, watching, following her entire life, hiding just beneath the surface of memory and perception. She tried to reason. Perhaps a tape loop, a forgotten recording, some psychogenic trick of the mind. But the radio emitted a warmth, a presence that no logic could account for. The more she listened, the more it seemed to twist, the melody echoing fragments of the apartment itself. The way the floor creaked beneath her bed, the corners of her desk, the faint smell of coffee and old paper. The lullaby was both music and witness, cataloging the minutiae of her life, recording them with a precision that felt supernatural. Miriam sank to the floor again, the radio before her, glowing like an eye, pulsing with that same heartbeat rhythm she had noticed earlier. The song coiled around her limbs, brushing along her hair, pooling in the small of her back, each note a finger drawing a line she could not follow. She shut her eyes, hoping that absence might break the enchantment. But the melody had already nested inside her skull, vibrating along the nerve endings, naming things she could not speak, promises and threats folded into one. And then she understood. The lullaby had always been hers, just not in the way she had ever known. It was older than the apartment, older than her parents, older than the night. It had been waiting, stored in the air, in the wood, in the pulse of things that outlast memory. Her life, her apartment, the storm, all of it had been shaping toward this moment. The revelation that some music is not played, but awakened. And once it awakens, it listens. The final note lingered. It hummed along her nerves, low and eternal. Miriam tried to move, but the world outside the radio had fallen silent. The storm dissolved. The city paused. There was only the song, and her own helpless awareness, vibrating in rhythm with it. The last flicker of lamplight cast a shadow across the radio, one that did not belong to any object in the room. And somewhere deep inside the lullaby, she felt a small, intimate acknowledgement. It had always known her, and now there was nothing left but to listen. Mara unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside, shaking off the drizzle that had soaked her coat. The hall light flickered softly, and the air smelled faintly of damp concrete and rain. She dropped her bag by the door and paused. Her bedroom, the room she had lived in for years, carried a sense so immediate, so vivid, that it made her stomach lurch. It was the unmistakable clean, sharp aroma of freshly showered skin, warm soap, faint floral hints, and the almost invisible residue of hair conditioner. She froze in the doorway, heart hammering. She had been alone all day. She had returned home from work to an empty apartment. She had not showered. No one else lived with her. The scent was heavy, lingering, saturating the air in a way that made the room feel too small. She pulled her coat tighter around her, the chill from the rain at odds with the warmth that seemed to seep from the walls. Mara's gaze traveled across the room. Her bed neatly made, her clothes folded on the chair, nothing out of place. Nothing moved. Nothing should be here. She stepped forward, and the scent shifted. It moved subtly, as if drawn to her, curling around her arms and brushing against her hair. She stopped again, startled. A floorboard groaned under her weight, but the sound seemed swallowed by the warm, impossible smell. It was everywhere, softly, insistently, as if the room itself were breathing. Mara's fingers grazed the edge of her dresser. The scent deepened, richer now, closer, unnervingly intimate. She shook her head. "I must be imagining it," she whispered, but her voice sounded thin, swallowed by the humidity of the air. The apartment had felt empty for years, a space carefully curated and predictable, each corner known, each shadow familiar. Tonight it was wrong. The air had weight, the smell had weight, pressing on her skin, infiltrating her senses. Mara's gaze darted to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tense, but the reflection alone could not explain the scent, could not explain the way it shifted when she moved closer or stepped back. It was like walking into a room full of someone she had known intimately, someone who had just left, except no one had been here. Her pulse accelerated as she walked toward the bed, drawn by a mixture of fear and fascination. The scent tightened, rolling along her clothes and hair, brushing her neck like invisible hands. It was impossibly precise, almost conscious, as though it had waited for her to arrive, had expected her movements and adjusted itself to them. Mara's breath caught. She swung the window open, hoping the damp night air would disrupt the sensation, but it only lingered, stubborn and warm, clinging to her skin, mocking her. She sank to the edge of the bed, knees drawn close. Her thoughts raced. Perhaps a neighbor, improbable but not impossible, had used her shower, entered her apartment somehow? No, the locks were new, solid. No key had been issued to anyone. She would have known. She would have felt it. And yet the scent persisted. It hovered near her, heavy with familiarity and impossibility. Mara closed her eyes, trying to anchor herself to reason. She tried to trace a memory, a sound, a moment when the smell might have belonged to someone real. A voice, a touch, a smile, nothing concrete. Just the fragrance, impossibly intimate, brushing against her nerves. And then, subtle, almost imperceptible, the warmth in the air shifted again, aligning with the beat of her own pulse. Her bedroom had stopped feeling like a room. It had become a presence. When she rose to check the bathroom, she noticed the scent was stronger there, pooling around the doorframe. She pressed her hand to the cool tile, noting that the water in the sink was dry, the shower untouched, and still the aroma lingered, the faint whisper of someone's hair brushing against their shoulders, the afterglow of steam that should have been impossible hours ago. Mara shivered. The bathroom light reflected off the mirror, catching the sheen of her skin, and the scent deepened, following her in patterns she could not predict. She moved toward the closet, and it tilted slightly, as though leaning toward her, waiting. Her thoughts tumbled. Could it be a memory? A ghost? Something trapped in the walls, waiting to be remembered? She remembered her mother's stories of inherited houses, of scents that carried the memory of those who had lived there, lingering decades later in the grain of wood and plaster. But her apartment was new, built only 5 years ago, in concrete and steel. Nothing should retain the scent of showers long past, of skin and soap and warmth. Mara stepped back toward her bed, every step a deliberate act against the creeping unease. The scent thickened, a subtle layering of heat and moisture that seemed to respond to her movement. She dropped to the floor beside the bed, pressing her palm to the carpet. It was dry, cold under her hand, but the smell pressed against her cheeks, her arms, wrapping her like a cloak. Every hair on her body raised in gooseflesh. It was impossible, and yet undeniably present, insisting on her attention. Her mind began to drift toward something she had forgotten, something long buried. A childhood memory, perhaps, a sibling, a friend, a moment when she had smelled someone leave her room, a moment of intimacy, of absence. faded and folded into her memory. And then the scent shifted again, closer now, brushing her earlobe, tracing the line of her neck. It was not just a smell. It was a presence, aware of her recognition, responding to the flicker of memory she had not yet fully grasped. She rose, trembling, and approached the dresser mirror. The reflection looked ordinary yet somehow wrong. The room itself seemed to watch, breathing with her. The scent shifted one last time, flowing behind her as she backed away. It was almost disappointed, as if it had expected more from her. She spun slowly, searching for the source, but there was none. Only the lingering warmth in the air, the brush of a phantom against her skin, the undeniable proof that she was not alone, and had perhaps never been alone. Mara sat back on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, unable to breathe fully, unable to leave. The scent persisted, subtle now, almost content, yet impossible. She realized, with a tightening in her chest, that it was a memory she had never lived, a body she had never known, an intimacy that was not hers to claim but that had claimed her nonetheless. And in that realization, the apartment seemed to settle, the air stilling, the walls pressing gently, the scent lingering just enough to remind her that some presences do not leave, do not pass, and do not forgive. She closed her eyes. The rain had stopped outside, and the city beyond was silent. The scent wrapped around her once more, as though to assure her of its existence. And somewhere in the pause between inhale and exhale, Mara understood that she had opened a door she could never close, that she had recognized a presence that had always been waiting for her, and that now it would wait forever. The bedroom smelled like someone had just showered, someone who had never existed,